Okay, so we've been talking about ecosystems and about the diversity that we see in the organisms that live in these ecosystems. First, we looked at the differences that can happen between two individuals of the same species. Like dogs, they're all the same species, but each breed looks totally different. We've also started to look at the differences that set two species apart, like dogs and wolves. They're closely related, so might look sort of similar, but they definitely have noticeable differences, so we know they're different species. This is the type of diversity we'll be looking at today. More specifically, how diversity between species can help us understand a new concept, the niche. So what is a niche? There are a lot of ways we can go about finding this out. Thesaurus.com tells us that a niche is a slot, an opening, and a position. The Britannica Dictionary says that a niche is how an organism interacts with all the other organisms in its ecosystem, and how an organism interacts with the ecosystem itself. Then we can look at diagrams like this one and see that a niche is where and how a species fits into its ecosystem based on the food it eats, the shelter it needs, and the type of environment it can live in. Every single species has a niche, even humans. With that in mind, let's do a think, pair, share activity. Jot down what you think your niche is. This can include where you live, what school you go to, any jobs you do, the food you eat, the temperature you feel most comfortable in, and any influences you have on your community. Here is an example of what we would have come up with using the think, pair, share. Why are niches so important in nature? First, because in any given ecosystem, there will only be a limited amount of resources available for the animals that live there. Remember that resources are things like food, water, shelter, heat, and more. Secondly, every single organism needs certain resources in order to live. They need food and probably have a specific type of food they have to eat. They need materials to build their shelters or protect their babies, and some species, like plants, need other nutrients like sunlight and CO2. Thirdly, when two organisms need the same resources, they have to compete with each other for them. Competition over resources happens between members of the same species as well as between members of completely different species. If the species that live in an ecosystem have different enough niches, they won't have to compete for food, habitats, or too many other resources. We say they can coexist, meaning they can live together in the same ecosystem. There are two types of niches in ecology: the niche specialists and the niche generalists. When we're talking about niche specialists, we're talking about organisms that have adapted to fill very narrow, specific, and unique niches. They only eat a few types of food, only use a few kinds of materials for their habitats, and usually they need a lot of each of these resources. Because they have such narrow resource needs, they aren't usually in competition for them with other animals. We call this low interspecific competition, or the competition that happens between two different species. Also, since specialists are pretty limited in what they need to survive, they are hugely impacted whenever there's a disturbance that affects their niche. Disturbances can be ecological, like a flood, drought, or disease that's going around, or maybe it's human-made impacts, like deforestation, overhunting, and losing their habitats when we build something new, where they used to live. When we're talking about niche generalists, we're talking about organisms that have adapted to use up a way broader range of resources. These animals can usually eat a lot of different types of food and are really good at using any available resources to their advantage. Unlike the specialists, generalists usually have a pretty high interspecific competition. Because they have such a broad niche, they will usually have to fight with other animals that need the same resources. Since generalists can change up what they need to survive, they are pretty resilient to most kinds of ecological disturbances and can be pretty resilient to human-made disturbances. It's important to remember that these two categories of niche are on a continuum. While some animals are definitely specialists and others are definitely generalists, some don't fit right into either category perfectly. Some animals might eat many types of food, for example, but have a really limited habitat range they can live in. We'd put these types of animals close to the middle since they have characteristics of both specialists and generalists. Now let's look at some examples of niches. The first are the giant pandas. They are niche specialists. Their diet is almost 100% bamboo, and they have to eat a lot of it because they don't get very many nutrients from it. They spend most of their energy eating, so they don't move around very much and will actually usually stay within 3 miles of their dens. When choosing a den, they have to make sure it's close to fresh drinking water and that their surroundings are safe for raising their cubs. Because the panda's niche is so specialized, they are at really high risk for environmental or human disturbances. Deforestation has limited their access to bamboo, which has been a serious threat to their population. The second example is the coyote. They are niche generalists. They have a really mixed diet and can eat rats, mice, squirrels, reptiles, birds, fruits, nuts, grasses, and can even scavenge on dead animals. They are really skilled hunters too and can switch up how they hunt their prey. They can either dig smaller prey, like rabbits, out of their burrows, or they can work as a pack to ambush and stalk larger prey. They can also run as fast as 40 miles per hour. Because their niche is so general, they're able to adapt quickly and thrive, even in densely populated human areas. Due to their broad niche, the coyote population is really resilient against most types of disturbances. To finish up, let's do a KWL. Fill in the What I Know column on a blank piece of paper. Then, think of some questions you might have in the What I Want to Know column. At the end of our lesson, you'll fill in what you learned about niches and species diversity and then hand it in to me.